What's up, people? Good morning. This is Ian Robinson. Welcome to my channel. Happy Health Day, right? So, in my last video, I mentioned something called metabolic syndrome, and I said that I would do a detailed video about metabolic syndrome. So now here I am, fulfilling my promise. This video is all about metabolic syndrome, and I do it in a presentation style, so I'll be having up the PowerPoint and all that good stuff in the video. So watch carefully, learn as much as you can learn, take notes, because this video, I know for a fact, this presentation can help you, or it can help you to help someone you love, because metabolic syndrome is a dangerous condition. So stay tuned, subscribe if you haven't, hit the like button, share it with your friends. Thanks for watching. Enjoy. Hey, what's up, people? So here we are with the presentation. Now let me just jump right in. We started page, Happy Health Day, with the topic metabolic syndrome, and of course my name, Ian Robinson. So, okay, here we go. Now, what exactly is metabolic syndrome, right? Remember what I said in my previous video, that metabolic syndrome is a condition that has a lot of people highly vulnerable and highly susceptible to contracting the virus, right? So now I'm gonna get right into metabolic syndrome. So here we go. So it says here, what I have here, it says, metabolic syndrome is a group of life-threatening conditions that results from a poor diet, a lack of physical activity, and chronic stress. Now, as we can see right here, some of the common causes of metabolic syndrome. We have poor diet, right? Poor diet, don't forget that one. We have a lack of physical activity. As I said earlier, we have chronic stress. Okay, so pay close attention to these three things. So if you have poor diet and a lack of physical activity and chronic stress, then do something about it, because you don't want that to lead to metabolic syndrome. Okay, here we go. Next one again, common causes, as I said earlier, poor diet. Now, when I say a poor diet, as far as metabolic syndrome is concerned, let's look at this. A poor diet is essentially when you eat too much processed foods and not enough whole foods. Now, what is processed foods? Processed foods basically are anything that's made from refined flour, refined sugar, your typical baked goods, anything made from that GMO wheat and that GMO corn, right? All that fancy stuff you can buy in the supermarket, in the bags and boxes, all that candy and junk, just basically junk food. That's what processed food is, junk food, right? Whole foods are foods that are natural, green, alive, filled with enzymes, filled with minerals. So if you have a poor diet, this can lead to metabolic syndrome. Now, one key thing about it though, when you eat too much processed food, is that it leads to an elevated insulin level. Elevated insulin level. Remember, insulin is a hormone that your pancreas secretes to bring down your blood sugar level. So when you're eating all this junk food and all this highly processed food, you're gonna produce an excess amount of insulin to bring down your blood sugar level. Now, when you have too much insulin in your body, trust me, it's not a good thing. Even though insulin is a good thing, but too much insulin in your blood can lead to metabolic syndrome. So be very careful. So the next thing to look at is lack of physical activity. Lack of physical activity is essentially a sedentary lifestyle that does not include much exercise. Means stop being a couch potato. It can lead to metabolic syndrome. Why? Because a sedentary lifestyle diminishes your HGH, which is your human growth hormones. Basically, you'll be losing more cells than you're gaining. The cells in your body will be dying at a faster rate than they're being produced. You'll be wasting away. So again, another common cause for metabolic syndrome is a lack of physical activity. Now, as far as chronic stress is concerned, which is the third one, one of the third prominent causes, is that chronic stress is essentially persistent system overload with no rest and relaxation, meaning you're being burnt out, you're being overworked, overstretched, right? With no breaks, no time to recover, no time to heal, no time to recoup. You're just constantly burning. And what happens with chronic stress is that it causes you to produce another hormone, which is called cortisol. It's a stress hormone. So if you look carefully right here with metabolic syndrome, you can see that 3 key hormones that helps you with your bodily functions are being triggered. Insulin is beneficial, it's a beneficial hormone, but the poor diet is causing you to produce too much insulin. That's a problem. Sedentary lifestyle is causing your body to produce too little HGH, right? And then chronic stress is causing you to produce cortisol, which is another hormone. And basically, with these hormones, these 3 hormones, in the insulin in an elevated state, the HGH in a diminished state, and the cortisol in an increased state, that's gonna cause you to gain weight. That's gonna cause you to put on weight, and that's gonna lead to obesity. Now that's a problem. Again, remember, common causes of metabolic syndrome: poor diet, lack of physical activity, and chronic stress. We have to watch out for these things, right? So the next slide here. Now, some of the common symptoms, right, of metabolic syndrome. First thing we have here, these are the 5 common syndromes. The first thing we have here is low HDL cholesterol. Next thing we're gonna have, the next symptom is this: high triglycerides. Pay keen attention to that. The next symptom is visceral obesity, highly problematic condition. The next one is hypertension. Hypertension is one of the signs and symptoms of metabolic syndrome. And the next thing to look at is insulin resistance, another sign of metabolic syndrome, right? Or if it's not a sign of that you have full metabolic syndrome, it's a sign that you're heading in the direction of metabolic syndrome. And again, as I said, metabolic syndrome, basically, it shows that the body is in a weakened state. It shows that the body is in a highly inflammatory state. And when your body is weakened and inflamed, this is gonna break down your immune system, break down all the systems in your body essentially, and you'll be so vulnerable to all sorts of viral infections. So be very careful. So now, as far as these 5 symptoms are concerned, if you have one of these symptoms, you might not necessarily have metabolic syndrome, because metabolic syndrome is like a spectrum, right? So if you have one of these symptoms, okay, you can get away with not having metabolic syndrome, but one, that's still problematic, right? If you have 2, you can still get away. So if you have, say, low HDL cholesterol and high triglycerides, you might be able to get away with not having full onset metabolic syndrome, right? However, if you can check off, if your doctor can check off that you have 3 of these conditions, 3, if you have insulin resistance, right? And if you have hypertension, plus you have visceral obesity, then the doctor is gonna say, hey, you have metabolic syndrome, right? So if you have at least any of these 3 conditions, if you can look within yourself and say, hey, I have 3 out of 5, or 4 out of 5, or 5 out of 5, then guess what? It is pretty safe to say, I don't know if the word safe is good to use in this case. You can rest assured that you have metabolic syndrome and your system is very compromised. You're vulnerable, right? So let's move on. Now, let's talk about these conditions, these symptoms on an individual basis, right? We're gonna start off with low HDL cholesterol. So basically, what is HDL and what does it mean to have low HDL, right? So HDL is high density lipoproteins, right? And these counteract the negative effects of low density lipoproteins. So basically, the high lipoproteins, the HDL, counteracts the negative effects of the low density lipoproteins, the LDL, right? So remember, high is good, low, not good when it comes on to the lipoproteins in your system. So HDL is the good cholesterol that removes LDL, the bad cholesterol, from your arteries. Remember that. It says HDL lowers the risk of heart disease. Low HDL can lead to stroke, heart attacks, and dementia. So low HDL can lead to a host of other problems. And this is why it's key to get your HDL levels checked by your doctor to make sure you have a high enough HDL level. Because the higher HDL, the better it is for you. Actually, I don't want to brag or anything, but the last time I went to the doctor, right? I did some blood work. And the doctor, when the results came in, my doctor said, wow, you have very high HDL. And he says, your HDL is at a level that you would normally see in people and in people in certain cultures who live for a long time. Like you have certain Japanese people who live for a long time. You have certain people who live in the Mediterranean who live for a long time, into like late 90s, maybe 100 something, you know? People in the Caribbean who live for a long time. And that's because they have a very high HDL. So if your HDL, your high density lipoproteins, are too low, that's very problematic. So you have to change up your diet to boost those things. Now, as you see here, I have my little hearts, my little illustration here on the side. So it says high HDL equals a happy heart. Low HDL equals unhappy heart. That's just a simple way I can illustrate it and show you to help to drive the point home. So remember, when your HDL is high, that's very good for your heart. It maintains your heart, right? And then another thing with HDL is that HDL is basically one of the building blocks that your body uses to produce hormones. Again, it's a cholesterol, and cholesterol is not necessarily negative. It's just a type of cholesterol. And the HDL, which is the good cholesterol, actually helps your body to generate new cells and generate cell membranes, right? To protect your nervous system. Remember, again, your brain is roughly like 75% fats. So all that fats, the HDL is helping your body to regenerate, to produce hormones, testosterone, and all those good hormones that you love so much. It's helping to regenerate the body, heal the body, to keep down LDL and all that bad stuff, right? Don't forget that. Now let's move on. So again, the low HDL is one of the symptoms or one of the signs basically of metabolic syndrome, right? So let's move on. Next one, visceral obesity. Uh-oh, we got a little shift here going, there's a little shift going on here in my presentation. All right, let me continue. So metabolic syndrome, again, another thing to watch out for with metabolic syndrome, right? Is visceral obesity. Again, if you have visceral obesity, it means that you have one of the markers or one of the signs that you possibly have metabolic syndrome, right? So let's go on. Okay, so what is visceral obesity? Visceral obesity occurs when there is an accumulation of fat in a person's abdominal cavity. So it's when there's an accumulation of fat in a person's abdominal cavity. Now, having an accumulation of fat in the abdominal cavity is not a normal thing, right? So if you see someone with a big belly, so to speak, or a large midsection, okay, sometimes it's a case where they have fat underneath their skin. Now, the fat underneath the skin is problematic, but it is not quite as problematic as when there is fat inside the abdomen, inside the abdominal cavity. Now, your adipose fat is outside of the abdominal cavity and it's just around the outside of the muscles, right? That's problematic. But when the fat is inside, when it spills over and it's inside your abdominal cavity, and when your organs are swimming in fat, that is problematic. Why is it problematic? Because the fat or the lipoprotein, the unnatural lipoprotein that your organs are swimming in, or the visceral obesity, it's a protein that produces a lot of inflammatory effects in your body. So if something is producing inflammatory effects in your body and it's right up against your organs, it's touching your colon, it's touching your stomach, it's touching your heart, it's around your lungs and all these things where it's not supposed to be, and it is inflamed, then it's going to make your organs inflamed. That is very problematic. That's not good for your organs. So essentially your organs will be falling to pieces because of the visceral fat, right? So we have to watch out for visceral fats also. Now, it says here, excess visceral fat can affect our hormones function in the body. First thing, remember, we want to keep our hormones nice and level and balanced. Nice, leveled, and balanced. Now, visceral obesity causes serious health problems such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, strokes, and Alzheimer's disease. Here we go again. The same conditions over and over, right? Now, stress and poor diet can increase the production of visceral fat. Remember, in the beginning of the presentation, I said something about, what was it again? In the beginning of the presentation, I said, so in the beginning of the presentation, I said something about cortisol. We said that cortisol can make you gain weight. Cortisol is a stress hormone that causes you to accumulate fat and to gain fat. This is the big problem. It links right back to stress again. So stress and a poor diet increases the production of visceral fat. So remember, visceral fat is the fat that is all within your abdominal cavity. It's the fat that's touching your organs. Very dangerous. Causes a lot of inflammation that can affect your organs in a very negative way, right? So let's move on. Next thing to think about, high triglycerides. Yep, high triglycerides. So if you have this checked off, if you have any of the first three checked off, problematic for you, right? So if you have high triglycerides, this is what you have to think about. You have to know. High triglycerides is a term used to describe an elevated level of blood lipids. What are lipids? Lipids are fats, grease, which leads to plaque in the arteries, blockages in the arteries, right? Now, it says excess triglycerides lead to type 2 diabetes and coronary heart disease. Here we go again. Not good. It says high triglyceride levels result in blockages in the arteries, thus causing heart attacks, strokes, and pulmonary embolisms. Very dangerous. So, you know, a heart attack is when the coronary arteries are blocked. The blood vessels that feed the heart muscles, when they get blocked up, you get a heart attack. You get a stroke when the blood vessels in your brain and the blood vessels that lead to your brain gets blocked. And then no oxygen, or no food, or no nutrients in the blood is getting to the brain. So the brain starves. So a heart attack is when the heart is starving, when the nutrients get cut off. A stroke is when the brain, when the nutrients are cut off from the brain. And a pulmonary embolism is basically when the same thing happens to your lungs, right? When the blood vessels in your lungs begin to get blocked up. That is highly problematic, right? Very problematic thing. So I guess you could call it a lung attack or a lung stroke, but you know, it might sound funny, but it's no laughing matter. It's very deadly. And that's all because of high triglycerides. Now, triglycerides result from overeating and a sedentary lifestyle. Now, I'm going to say something about triglycerides. Triglycerides occur when you eat too much, especially when you eat too many calories. Now, you have to remember, a calorie is a good thing. A calorie is a unit of energy, right? It's a unit of energy that your body uses to do work. Now, if you eat too much, you're going to have too many excess energy units stored up in your body. So what do you have to do with these energy units? You have to burn them off by being physically active, you know, by running, walking, swimming, doing something besides laying down in bed or being a couch potato or just Netflix and chilling all day or just sitting down playing video games all day. You're eating all this food, especially if the food is highly processed, where it's just empty calories, and you have all these calories pumping into your system. And then with all the calories, which is equal to all this energy being pumped into your system, and you're not burning it off, then guess what? It is going to accumulate. You're going to have an overload. And where are these things stored in your body? It gets stored in your blood vessels. That's not good, right? Very dangerous. So that's it for high triglycerides. Now, the real dangerous thing right here, insulin resistance. So if you have insulin resistance, there's a possibility that you might have metabolic syndrome, right? So let's see insulin resistance. It says insulin resistance occurs when the pancreas burns out from overwork by producing excess insulin. Basically, your pancreas is overworking because you're eating so much junk food and so much processed sugars and processed flour, which processed flour essentially converts into sugar at the end of the day. You know, you're eating too much of this thing, all this sugar is getting dumped in your blood. Your pancreas is going to overwork in order to convert the sugar into glucagon. And the glucagon gets stored in the cells because the sugar itself the glucose cannot be stored in the cells. So insulin comes out, converts it to glucagon, then your cells can absorb that and store that for later use. Right? Very interesting stuff, isn't it? Fascinating. I love it. Now, it says insulin resistance syndrome includes health problems like obesity, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes. Now, a lot of people might not know this, but there's a very close link between high blood pressure and diabetes. A lot of people might not know it, some of the experts might not say it, but there's a connection between these conditions. There's a very close connection between them. And a lot of time, it also goes back to the foods we eat. This is why it's important for us to eat our ancestral foods, or sometimes, instead of eating 3 meals a day, we can eat 1 meal a day. Sometimes we can take a fast. We can do intermittent fasting. You know what I mean? And that gives our body a chance to get rid of the excess stuff and to purge, and gives our organ or that tongue twister, our organs a chance to heal and recover, and for us to flush out all this excess stuff, right? Physical activity is very important. It helps us to balance our bodies and all these good things. So pay very close attention. Now, insulin resistance affects 1/3 of all American adults. So therefore, if you see 3 American adults lined up, there's a possibility that 1 out of the 3 of them has insulin resistance, which is going to lead to type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and obesity. So this is a very prevalent thing. And again, it's all about the foods we eat. Very keen. Now, next thing with insulin resistance. A poor diet, sedentary lifestyle, smoking, and hormonal disorders cause insulin resistance. Whew. Very crucial thing, man. Very crucial thing that's affecting so many people in the world and leaving so many of our people open to contracting the virus, open to contracting all sorts of other virus. This thing is taking away people's lives. So it's very keen for us to be careful of what we eat and be active and diminish stress also, right? So let's see what's next here. Oh, high blood pressure, aka hypertension, right? So hypertension is another name for high blood pressure, and it leads to health complications and increased risk for heart disease, stroke, and kidney failure. Heart disease, strokes, and kidney failure. That's hypertension. Hypertension, also called high blood pressure, is also called the silent killer. Now, hypertension is something that I was diagnosed with because of high stress. Again, as I said in the previous video, I was working a very stressful job, and that led me to develop hypertension. So I have to do everything in my power to keep my blood pressure low. I mean, I have to eat whole foods. I have to eat lots of vegetables. I can't just drink anything. I have to make sure I get my sleep. You understand? I have to make sure I don't eat too much meat, because I used to eat a lot of meat, and that used to put a lot of pressure on my kidneys. And when I learned that, I cut down my meat intake drastically. I was never a person who ate a lot of carbs, but I love meat. I love me some red meat. I love bison. I love beef. Oh my God. But those things are putting too much stress on my kidneys. Again, the funny thing is that a lot of times when you eat a lot of protein, your body can only utilize but so much. The rest of the protein gets converted to glucose. And then that can lead to even the blood sugar spikes. So again, it all ties in together. The blood sugar spikes, the hypertension, all these things are tied in. Now, almost a half of the adults in the United States of America have hypertension. So if you see two people, 1 out of 2, or 2 out of 4, 3 out of 6, 5 out of 10, you get my jive, have hypertension. Half of the people have hypertension. And this hypertension could be linked back to what people are eating, could be linked back to stress. A very, very, what should I call it? I don't want to say popular, but it's a widespread condition that is killing a lot of people and shortening a lot of people's lives, making people susceptible to viruses, diminishing people's lifestyles, or diminishing people's, what should I call it? What's the right word to use? Quality of life. Yeah. So watch out for these things. So some key symptoms to look out for as far as metabolic syndrome are concerned, metabolic syndrome is concerned rather, is low HDL, visceral obesity, high triglycerides, insulin resistance, and hypertension. Now, how do you know that you have hypertension? If you check your blood pressure and you get 168 over 124, that's a high number. The normal number is 120 over 80. That's the normal standard, right? But if it's above that, if the top number is above 120 and the bottom number is above 80, like drastically above it, then you know you have hypertension, right? That's a problem. And that's one of the markers of metabolic syndrome. So, boom, take a look at this. It says you are suffering from metabolic syndrome if you have been diagnosed with at least 3 of these conditions. My people, listen carefully. If you've been diagnosed with 3 out of 5, or 4 out of 5, or 5 out of 5 of these conditions, you have metabolic syndrome. You are highly susceptible to contracting the virus, to contracting any kind of virus, to contracting all sorts of health conditions, from cancer, all sorts of stuff. It weakens your body. And it's all because of what we eat. It's all because of our lifestyles. We have to lose weight. We have to cut out junk food. We have to minimize our stress. We have to cut out the processed foods. We have to eat foods that build our HDL, like salmon and foods like animal fats and such, to build the HDL, which is only going to build hormones in our body and benefit us, right? Help to build our cells, our cell membranes, and all those things are made from fats, which come from the HDL, right? We have to decrease the triglycerides in our bodies. That's just clogging up our arteries and giving us arterial sclerosis. That's making our blood vessels hardened. We have to do something about the insulin resistance. We have to drop the insulin level in the blood. Because sometimes you might take, you might use, what would you call it? A blood sugar monitor and check your blood sugar. And you check your blood sugar level, or the amount of glucose in your blood, and it says, okay, 110, that's fairly good. But what is the insulin level in your blood? How much insulin did it take to convert that amount of glucose into glucagon? So the thing we need to know also is the insulin level. I don't know if there's a machine that could check the insulin level, but if you go to your doctor, he can tell you your insulin level. So it's not just to find out your glucose level in the blood, but you also need to know your insulin level, how much insulin is flowing through your blood if you haven't been eating anything. Because the insulin is a hormone that is beneficial. It's there to serve a purpose, but if it's too much, or if your pancreas is overworked, that's a problem, right? Now, in conclusion, metabolic syndrome is very dangerous because it leads to so many life-threatening conditions. Heart attacks, strokes, deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolisms, can lead to Alzheimer's, cancers, all these problematic issues, weaken your immune system and everything. So a vast number of American adults suffer from metabolic syndrome. And it just so happened that a lot of people over 65 suffer from metabolic syndrome. And this is why people over 65 are placed on that list as far as the high risk list when it comes on to the virus that's spreading around the world right now. And this is another reason why you don't see too many kids coming down with this condition, because kids are generally healthier unless they have some kind of congenital issue. But most kids are generally healthier. Most kids don't have visceral obesity or hypertension are insulin resistance. You know what I mean? Most kids are very healthy. Their hormones are balanced. That's why you don't see a lot of kids coming down with the virus. Now, a poor diet and a sedentary lifestyle and stress are some of the most prominent paths to metabolic syndrome. So pay close attention. Poor diet, sedentary lifestyle, and stress are the most prominent pathways to metabolic syndrome. So you need to drop these things. You need to fix these things in your lives. Low HDL, visceral obesity, high triglycerides, insulin resistance, and hypertension are key signs of metabolic syndrome. So if you have 3 out of 5, you have metabolic syndrome. If you have 4 out of 5, you have metabolic syndrome. If you have 5 out of 5, you have metabolic syndrome. If it's a case where you only have 2, well, then we can't necessarily say that you have metabolic syndrome, but if you leave it alone, you will get there. So if you have 2, do what you can to reverse it. A matter of fact, even if you have 5 of these conditions and you've been officially diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, do everything in your power to reverse these conditions. These conditions are very reversible. It's all about what you eat, your stress level, and the amount of physical activity that you do. So eat better, be more active, cut the stress. So my people, stay safe. I love you all. Please like, subscribe, and please share this video with your friends. Share this presentation with your friends, because again, it can help you and it can help you to help someone you love, right? So have a happy health day. Peace out.